Alara sat at the polished oak table of the upscale restaurant, the ambient light casting a warm glow over the polished silverware and crisp linen napkins. She had spent the last 4 years pouring every ounce of herself into her studies, sacrificing sleep, friendships, and even moments of joy for the promise of a future she wanted to claim on her own terms. Today was supposed to be a celebration, a recognition of her perseverance. Yet, sitting across from her, her parents and sister radiated a pride that felt hollow, rehearsed, almost performative. Her mother, in a dress far too tight and too bright for the subdued atmosphere, leaned forward, a glint of amusement in her eyes. "For your graduation, we have a gift, from all of us," she announced, voice sweet yet edged with something sharp, almost venomous. Her sister, perched beside her father, held up her phone, recording every flicker of reaction on Alara's face. The very thought made her stomach twist. Alara forced a polite smile and nodded as her mother placed a neatly folded envelope in front of her. The envelope was heavy with implication, the kind of weight that told you before you even read the words that it could change everything. She unfolded it slowly, the paper crackling in her hands like dry leaves, and read the declaration: she was being disowned. In black ink on pristine white paper, it stated that she was no longer considered a part of their family, effective immediately, for her own good, they had written, though the words dripped with contempt. Time seemed to slow. The clinking of cutlery and muted conversation around her faded into a blur. Her parents exchanged a glance, her father smirking slightly, a silent satisfaction in his eyes. Her sister stifled a giggle, still recording. It was clear, they were not worried about her reaction, not at all. They wanted to see her crumble. And for a moment, something inside her did hurt. A raw, piercing ache that cut deeper than she thought possible. Every cruel comment, every comparison to her sister, every subtle act of manipulation they had inflicted over the years flashed in her mind, now culminating in this public spectacle. But Alara did not cry. She did not yell. She did not throw the letter across the table or storm out in a scene that would feed their entertainment. Instead, she breathed slowly, feeling the storm inside her settle into something else, something colder, sharper, more precise. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice calm, almost eerily composed. She folded the letter with deliberate care, letting them watch as she did. She stood, straightening her graduation gown, and walked out of the restaurant. The click of her heels against the marble floor echoed like a warning, though they didn't notice. Outside, the air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere she had left behind. Alone, she allowed herself a moment to feel anger, sorrow, and a deep, burning resolve. They thought this was the end of her story. They thought their final, humiliating act would break her. But they had no idea what she had already set in motion, what she had already achieved quietly, meticulously, while they reveled in their own self-righteousness. She had learned over the years that power didn't always roar, sometimes, it whispered, it waited, it moved unseen. And that was the power she now carried in her hands, heavier than any envelope, sharper than any word they had thrown at her. As she walked down the city streets, the lights reflecting off the wet pavement, Alara allowed herself a faint smile. She wasn't just leaving the restaurant, she was leaving the constraints, the cruelty, the false love behind. They thought they had given her a devastating gift. But in truth, the gift was hers all along. And soon, they would see it. Alara walked through the quiet streets, the city lights flickering like distant stars. The crisp night air carried a sense of possibility, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the restaurant she had just left behind. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, reminding her that the life she was leaving behind was not the one she had ever truly wanted. Her mind drifted back, unwillingly, to her childhood, years filled with subtle cruelty masked as guidance and tough love. She remembered the way her mother would compare her to her older sister, always emphasizing how she fell short. "Why can't you be more like her?" A question that had been asked countless times, each repetition carving a tiny scar in her heart. And her father, ever the silent enforcer, would nod along, his disappointment heavier than any punishment he could have handed down. Her sister, the one who had filmed her humiliation today, was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Alara had watched as her sister basked in attention, as her parents lauded her achievements while barely acknowledging Alara's existence. And yet, she had persevered, quietly excelling where it mattered, keeping her successes private, knowing that any display of triumph would only invite their criticism. It was in those years of neglect and subtle sabotage that she had learned to survive, not by fighting, but by planning. She remembered the first time she had quietly intercepted one of her father's careless investments, redirecting a small sum into a hidden account of her own. She had felt a thrill of empowerment she had never experienced under their roof. It was a small victory, but it had tasted sweet, like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. Over the years, Alara had cultivated other tools of quiet rebellion. She had nurtured relationships outside her family, mentors who recognized her intelligence and ambition. She had documented everything, the lies, the manipulations, the betrayals, carefully storing evidence of every subtle humiliation, every whispered insult. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival, about building a life that no one could take from her. As she reflected on her past, the anger she had felt at the restaurant shifted into clarity. She understood now that her parents' cruelty had been predictable, almost ritualistic. Their need to control, to dominate, to belittle was their weakness. And weaknesses could be exploited. Alara's thoughts returned to the present, to the disownment letter that had been meant to break her. But the truth was, it had done the opposite. It had crystallized everything she had been feeling for years, transforming the simmering anger into a quiet, burning determination. She would not cry, she would not plead, and she would not beg for the love she had never truly received. Instead, she would act. Her revenge would not be loud or clumsy. Alara had always known that revenge was most potent when it was invisible at first, a quiet force that crept into the cracks of her family's perfect facade. The world outside her parents' expectations had been hers to conquer for years, and now she intended to do so with precision, turning their pride and cruelty against them. Her first move was subtle but devastating. She contacted her father's most trusted business partners, sending carefully curated information about his questionable dealings over the years. Nothing illegal enough to warrant immediate action, but enough to seed doubt, to make people watch him more closely, to make them question his integrity. She didn't need chaos, she needed the slow, inevitable unraveling that would make him squirm in ways he had once made her feel powerless. Next, she turned her attention to her sister, the one who had gleefully filmed her humiliation. Using a combination of social strategy and long-hidden evidence of her sister's manipulations, she exposed the truth to key social circles. Invitations were rescinded, gossip spread, and the sister who had always been untouchable suddenly found herself isolated. Alara didn't celebrate outright, she watched quietly, savoring the irony, knowing that her sister's fall was a mirror of the years of belittlement she had endured. Her mother, the orchestrator of the restaurant spectacle, was next. Alara uncovered secrets that had been meticulously hidden, financial missteps, betrayals of family friends, minor but socially damaging scandals. Letters, emails, and carefully documented conversations formed a chain of subtle revelations, all timed for maximum impact. Each disclosure was like a chess move, calculated to destabilize her mother's confidence and social standing without ever touching Alara's own reputation. Throughout it all, Alara felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Revenge was not simple. It required patience, restraint, and a keen understanding of human nature. She often thought of the hurt she carried from years of subtle abuse, from the moments she had been overlooked or dismissed. Yet in each act of retribution, she also reclaimed a piece of herself that had been denied, each calculated move a statement: I am more than your cruelty. I am stronger than your contempt. She made sure that her actions were not driven by blind anger but by intelligence and timing. Every email, every phone call, every social ripple was orchestrated with precision. She watched from the shadows as her parents' carefully constructed world began to wobble. Her father became defensive and secretive, her sister's smiles grew tighter, her laughter more forced. And her mother, once so confident in her manipulations, now hesitated before speaking, the subtle tremor of uncertainty creeping into her demeanor. But the sweetest part of all was the knowledge that they had no idea who was behind it. They thought their actions at the restaurant had left her broken, humiliated, and defeated. In reality, they had merely lit the spark of a fire that had been smoldering for years, a fire that would consume their arrogance and leave nothing but ashes of regret. Yet Alara never lost herself entirely to revenge. She reminded herself daily that her goal was not cruelty for its own sake, but the reclamation of her life. Each victory, each small humiliation of her family, was a step toward freedom, a demonstration that she was no longer bound by their expectations, their manipulations, or their conditional love. By the time she sat in her apartment late at night, reviewing the progress of her subtle upheavals, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She had turned their own weapons against them, and it felt intoxicating, but not in the way they had imagined. This was not a moment of gloating, it was a quiet triumph, a reclamation of dignity, a proof of power earned through patience, intelligence, and self-restraint. Alara's gaze lingered on the city skyline outside her window. Her family had thought they were the masters of her story, that a single letter could end her path. But she had learned long ago that true strength lies in quiet preparation, in measured action, in the patience to wait for the right moment. And now, that moment was beginning to bloom. She whispered to herself, almost tenderly, "They have no idea that the girl they tried to destroy has already rewritten the rules." The gala was held in a grand hall, crystal chandeliers sparkling overhead, their light catching on polished marble floors and the shimmering dresses of the city's elite. Alara stepped into the room, her posture perfect, her presence commanding. She was no longer the girl who had sat humiliated at a restaurant, holding a disownment letter as her family smirked. She was a woman who had taken control of her own destiny, who had patiently, meticulously turned every slight, every insult, every betrayal into a stepping stone toward her own triumph. Her parents were there, seated at a prime table, their smiles practiced, their pride performative. Her sister, radiant and oblivious to the storm that had been quietly brewing, glanced around for attention, still unaware that the ground beneath her carefully curated world was beginning to crumble. Alara moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who knew exactly who she was, each step deliberate. Conversations paused briefly as people took note of her, curious whispers trailing in her wake. She had arrived not just as a graduate, but as someone whose influence, intellect, and carefully constructed alliances were palpable even to strangers. Then the moment came. With poise and a calm that belied the years of suppressed rage and pain, she began to reveal the culmination of her quiet efforts. It started with subtle conversations, leading the right people to the right truths. Her father's business partners began to question past decisions, small doubts multiplying rapidly. Her mother's social circle murmured about minor, hidden scandals that had suddenly surfaced. And her sister, once untouchable, faced whispers and questions that left her smile tight and her laughter hollow. No one in the room realized the architect of this upheaval was the very girl they had once mocked and dismissed. Alara watched from the periphery, her satisfaction tempered by a quiet, serene composure. She did not gloat. She did not demand recognition. Her triumph was in the knowledge that she had orchestrated this carefully, patiently, and without the desperate need for validation. After the gala, she stepped outside onto the terrace, the city light sprawling like a constellation beneath her. The wind tugged lightly at her hair, and for the first time in her life, she felt unburdened. The weight of familial expectation, the pressure to please, the constant need to prove herself, these were gone. She had taken them, transformed them, and left them behind. Alara allowed herself a moment of reflection. There had been sorrow in this journey, there always was when dealing with betrayal so close to the heart. She had mourned the love she would never receive, the family she could never fully belong to. But she had also discovered something far more powerful, herself. Her intelligence, her patience, her resilience, they were hers alone, unshakable and indestructible. When she returned